afternoon. Today we'll be looking at JFK's inaugural address. It's quite a lengthy text, so I'd advise getting some additional paper for notes. There's quite a bit we need to go through, and potentially getting some extra paper on that for your context and PAM-TC details, because there's more than usual for this one. So if you can find the text in your anthology, please. It is text 9.1. It is an extract from the speech by JFK at his inauguration, a formal ceremony to mark the beginning of his term of office as the President of the United States. It took place on the 20th of Jan 1961 in Washington. So you can just pause for a moment and then read through the speech. Okay, we'll start with the purpose then, bearing in mind that he's just being sworn into presidency now. So it's for him, because he's a newly elected president, to gain the trust of his country, particularly those who may have voted against him. He was a Democrat, and obviously Republicans, they may not be a huge fan of him, but basically he's extending this welcome to everyone. And sorry, just there, while extending a policy of peace in an attempt to end the Cold War. We'll look at the Cold War more when it comes to context, but again, that was a huge factor during his presidency. So you've got many Americans fearing the consequences of the Cold War, the spread of communism. It was a huge concern following World War II. Essentially, you had the Soviet Union, so Russia and other countries, communist, basically seen as like world domination. We had the conflict then between the Soviet Union and America. So the Americans were obviously disturbed during this time. It was very fragile. Their previous president was very aggressive, you could say, when it came to kind of defeating this. Whereas JFK is more about promoting the peace between the USA and the Soviet Union. You may want to do some extra reading surrounding this because it's quite a big topic. So just be looking up the Soviet Union and JFK's relationship with the Cold War. On top of that, he is a fresh face to this, unfamiliar with kind of the presidency role. So it's about him setting the scene for his presidency, what his priorities are going to be, such as space exploration, resolving conflicts, etc. So again, he's really trying to get across here his kind of values and what he's going to be doing. And finally, to reassure those who supported Eisenhower, previous president, that he is capable of taking over the president role, because there were some doubts surrounding him, but he's basically trying to get across that he can do a good job. Okay, next we have the audience then. So obviously it's his address to the USA, so mainly targeting the American public. He's trying to basically reassure them that they're in safe hands. However, you can see at times it's not just to America. He knows that it's going to have a wide audience. So there's clear kind of digs and links to the Soviet Union. So like I said, do your research on that. So you've got your Russia and Euro countries, communist, etc. But you can see there's some very clear direct address links to the Soviet Union. So you could say their enemy at the time, basically saying that America will succeed. On top of that, the speech was televised, and it was the first one actually, I think, that was televised in colour. So it was a big event for everyone watching. And then, and yeah, also addressing his political opponents in an attempt to contradict basically any concerns that people had of him. Okay, mode then. So obviously this is a speech. I don't know what happened there, but you've got a speech. So it's for those in positions of power. They deliver a speech to get across their ideas. There would have been a prepared element to this. In fact, the whole thing would have been prepared. This was not a spontaneous speech, particularly because if it's being watched on such a big scale. It was intended for broadcast as well. So you need to come across with some nice kind of syntax and phonology, which I've just added there. Because it's a spoken text, you're looking for all the sound devices, carefully crafted sentence types, etc. Okay, topicality then, so what this is talking about, it's quite simple. He starts by basically asking for peace. Okay, he wants a prosperous nation, he wants America to reunite, and he wants there to be peace. He wants to leave a legacy for others to be inspired by. It's not just about when he is president, he's looking towards the future. He does reference the Cold War, subtly, to be fair, and the conflict with the Soviet Union. And he's basically saying that there is the strength in America; they will not be beaten. But he wants to do this in a peaceful way. And then there is the tone that America is the savior, and that Europe and all the other places that are threatened by the Soviet Union, that America is their leader, and America and him as president will lead them to success. Okay. Context then for this one. So JFK, 35th President of the United States. He was an advocate for civil rights, unlike many of the presidents before him. He stood up for equality and peace, which many believed potentially was one of the reasons he was assassinated on the 22nd of November 1963. I'm sure you know, but he was shot and he was killed, and there's many kind of theories as to why this happened, but many think it's because he was such an advocate for civil rights and equality. So JFK was in power at the height of the Cold War, so we've been basically 50 years. So unlike Eisenhower, so the president before, um, Kennedy really wanted peaceful coexistence across the world. He was more concerned about charity and working together than, nukes and firepower. More personal context for him, he is Harvard educated, wealthy family. He was the first Catholic president and he was a commander in World War II. So again, garnering that respect potentially from the American public. Kennedy wasn't actually meant to be president in the first place, which is why there was some debate about why, he's president and people trusted him or not. It was meant to be his brother that was president. But after his untimely death, JFK, became the main focus. So again, you could say that he was kind of thrust into this, and maybe a little bit, well, it wasn't really prepared for it. And then we have the speech attracting a huge audience because it was the first televised speech in colour. So again, just further context there, just showing how big the audience would have been. Okay, so we're about to start our annotations. Quite a lot. You might want to reduce some of them down. You might need more paper and post-it notes, etc. But it's quite rich in devices, particularly phonological and syntax ones. Right, so the beginning then. It starts with those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word. So it's direct address. So to those new states whom we welcome, basically addressing straight away, those who didn't vote for me. So the Republicans, welcoming them, we want to work together. It's a time to collaborate. He's not saying, okay, those who didn't vote for me, I don't like you. Instead, he's trying to welcome them. So it's kind of a warm voice to begin with. We then have him talking about, his leadership style. He doesn't want an iron tyranny. He understands that people won't support his view. So if we go to iron tyranny, that is a metaphor. And it's basically the message that he will not rule with an iron fist. He's not going to be this big dictator. He's not going to be overpowering and not, thinking about his people. So his decisions won't affect or come at the cost of his people in America. He does understand that not everyone will support his views, as it says there, but he's basically pleading in a sense, just give me a chance here, give me a break, let's see how we can do this. Okay, so again, now he's talking about, those that maybe didn't support him through his election. So you've got your sibilants there, shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom. Just adds that emphasis there that he is accepting that people will have different viewpoints. Then more importantly then, he does this kind of, a bit of a threatening reminder to people that in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. So if we see America as the tiger and other nations as people who have kind of just, jumped on America and just kind of use them as such, that they're in danger, because they'll end up inside the tiger, they won't survive. So it's an analogy. So he's like a comparative story here, isn't he? and it's an extended metaphor as well. It shifts the tone here. It's a little bit more threatening. And yeah, those who seek to abuse his power and the power of the USA, it will not end well for you. You'll be eaten by the tiger. Okay, here, start of this paragraph, he establishes a semantic field of poverty, so huts and villages, the globe struggling, mass misery, etc. Because again, obviously that's, growing poverty across the world, the Cold War causing some serious issues, and he's addressing them. It's kind of this humanitarian tone, again, potentially one of the reasons that people didn't like him. You've got your superlative best with best efforts to show that he will do everything in his power to help the poor. So he's kind of addressing the class divisions here. Then, as we get to the end of that, it says, if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. In other words, if you can't help the poor, who are the many, there's more of them, then what chance do the very few people who are rich going to have? So you've got the reverse syntax. So basically, it's kind of like syntactic parallelism, but it flips the ordering of the sentence. Sorry. So if you look here, cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. So again, you've got that flip there, a bit of juxtaposition between the poor and the rich. So you've got him utilising this sentence structure to emphasise that economic progress is essential. There are too many poor people who should be the priority here. So by him saying the many who are poor, it's making that very clear that that is the priority, not the few who are rich. Okay. So we've moved now to this bit, so more direct address, but here it's to our sister republic south of our border, we offer a special pledge. So you've got your adjective and intensifier special, so it's a special pledge, adding a large amount of focus here. Now, it's communicating his desire to grow a relationship with the countries of South America, because obviously you've always had that divide there. He's acting as this voice of reason that they need to work together, particularly with all the issues that are happening across the world, and how he's going to act where other leaders have failed. So he's offering a special pledge to them. And where it says to convert our good words into good deeds, again, it's that whole idea that people have made these empty promises before, but he will actually do something. Then he's talking about assisting free men and free governments in casting off the chains of poverty. Quite a nice quote, it's a metaphor. Casting off the chains of poverty, it's quite emotively driven, isn't it? It's like his personal conviction to break down the barriers between the rich and the poor. So he wants to break down these economic barriers. Okay. We then have him saying, let all our neighbours know that we shall join with them. So you've got your quantifier all. It's quite warm as well with, the familiar noun neighbours. It's about collaboration. He's all for working together, not being overbearing or overruling. He wants to work as a collective. Then it goes on to say, so the tone shifts a little bit, and let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of its own house. So here you've got your personification. He's saying other power, but we know that that is a reference to the Soviet Union. Now, the personification is basically saying they're not tolerating any threats. No one is going to take control of America. We will remain the master of our own house. No one can come and take control from us. So it's a little bit threatening. He's addressing the Soviet Union more or less for the first time here, and it's just showing how strong the USA is. Right. We now move more onto the kind of the topic of war specifically here. So he says where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace. So you've got the juxtaposition there between war and peace, but basically showing that people have been more concerned about developing weapons of mass destruction than actually working together and creating peace and, bringing down the barriers between the rich and the poor. So he's showing that the USA and other nations should be more concerned with promoting peace as opposed to spending their money, their time, their efforts creating these hideous weapons. And then he says to prevent it from becoming merely a forum for invective. Now, noun invective, it basically just means like abuse and harassment. So he's saying that these weapons of war have just become words, and that's it. So more about the actual, the threats that come with war and the threats that come with these weapons. And we still have that now. The different countries making nuclear weapons, sorry, because another country has made nuclear weapons and no one's actually using them, but they're just used to threaten each other. So basically saying that's what he wants to prevent. He doesn't want all these weapons being made just so people can threaten each other. Okay. So finally, to those nations who would make themselves our adversary. So I would argue it is euphemistic because adversary is basically enemy, but it's less aggressive than saying that. Now, adversary creates a tone of strength. The fact that he's not being brutal and saying our enemy, the people we hate, etc., it shows that he's got this, reason in his voice. He's professional, and it makes him seem more controlled and a bit more superior. So he's addressing those now to those who are trying to control and conquer the USA. And then he's basically pleading with them for peace. We want peace here. We need to stop this madness. He wants the Cold War to end, which it did until 1991. But then he says, before the dark powers of destruction unleashed by science engulf all humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction. So basically, it's saying how these weapons of destruction, these nuclear weapons, it could cause mass destruction and then it makes everything futile. What was the point of it all? Particularly where it says accidental self-destruction, it shows that they don't really have an understanding of nuclear weapons completely and how dangerous they could be. So it's hyperbolic imagery, you've got dark powers and destruction unleashed. It's quite emotive, it's creating tension here. Look how fragile we all are in the scheme of things. And he's urging everyone else to kind of consider the damage they may cause. Okay. Still maintaining that kind of strong tone now, so we dare not tempt them with weakness. So speaking as a collective now for America, so we got that plural first person pronoun. And it suggests that, America needs to work together, all citizens together as one, and there shouldn't be any divisions between themselves, particularly with what's going on in the world. But more specifically here, we dare not tempt them with weakness. It's a message to them to say, we're not weak. Do not take my kindness for weakness, because he is being very diplomatic here. He's not being very aggressive, but he's more or less saying, but do not mistake this for me being weak, as America is being weak. Then he says, for only when our arms are sufficient beyond doubt can we be certain beyond doubt that they will never be employed. Now, I'm arguing that this is a bit ironic. Okay, so he's saying that, these weapons shouldn't be made, they're very dangerous. But he's also saying in the same breath that, only when we have enough of them and we feel secure in ourselves can we then know we won't actually have to use them. So he's basically saying that, there's these weapons. If another country makes the weapon, they feel like they need to then make a weapon. And it's that vicious cycle. And hopefully no one will ever use them. But at the same time, they will continue to make them whilst the threat is still there. Okay. So now he says, but neither can two great and powerful groups of nations take comfort from our present course. Both sides overburdened by the cost of modern weapons, both rightly alarmed. Da, 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 da. So you've got the repetition of the determiner both. So now he's talking about both sides again, not just from the perspective of America, for the Soviet Union as well. And it's trying to create this sense of unity between them, repairing that fragile relationship, and how basically what is happening now isn't benefiting either of them. They're both overburdened by the cost of creating these weapons, for example, so that both sides are economically suffering because of this kind of futile conflict. Then starts talking about the spread of the deadly atom, yet both racing to alter that uncertain balance of terror that stays the hand of mankind's final war. So key quote there is mankind's final war. So you've got the adjective final, which should be quite daunting. You know, if all these weapons keep getting made, and if they are used, it may be mankind's final war because it will cause so much destruction that there will be no life anymore. So, it's a motive. I'd say it's very unsettling for not just the USA but the world. Shows how futile it all is in the scheme of things. If everyone's going to be fighting, it might cause an irreversible catastrophe, and then no one has won. Also added there, you could say there's a little bit of irony, because the USA, you know, I'm sure you know about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the nuclear bomb attacks that the USA was responsible for. Regardless of, you know, whether they were right or not, they used their weapons. So maybe here he's trying to kind of get people to forget about that, to rid America of all these past associations and actions, by saying that we need to move on and we can't rely on these weapons. Right. Then we have, so let us begin anew. So that imperative here is basically imploring for everyone to start afresh. He asserts his newfound authority and what his intentions as president are, because every president comes in with a different viewpoint and, you know, different way of thinking. He's trying to say, let's start again, particularly during this horrible time of the Cold War. And then you've got, let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. So you've got reverse syntax again. And it shows that negotiations, compromises, and ultimately it's communication that is needed to resolve this conflict. So they shouldn't be forced to negotiate out of fear, but at the same time, they will need to negotiate. Right. Let both sides explore what problems unite us instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. So you've got the verb belaboring there. It just kind of creates that this is an ongoing dispute that has lasted far too long now. It's not in the interest of anyone for this to continue. It kind of creates a bit of an exhausted tone. So let's stop going over and reiterating all these problems we have. Instead, let's move forward. And then he says, let both sides, for the first time, formulate serious and precise proposals. Now, I'd say the first time bit is the important bit here. It's a bit of a dialectic expression. It's saying that this is the very first time this is going to happen. So I've said it's a bit of a slight, a bit of a dig at his predecessors, so those that came before him, because he's saying that it hasn't been done before, that their approaches, particularly Eisenhower, they weren't productive, they didn't get them anywhere. Instead, now that he is president for the first time, he'll get things moving and he'll be able to promote progress and peace for the first time. Right, so we've got a bit of movement here now. So it's more about the hope for the future. So he says, let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. So you've got a juxtaposition there between wonders and terrors, showing that with all this science, people shouldn't be working on warfare, instead looking at exploring the stars, etc. There's so much that can be done with science that isn't detrimental to humanity. And then, yeah, more specifically here, together let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depths. So you've got a nice bit of asynthetic listing there, basically offering all the different things that could be done instead of this conflict and how much there is to explore. Now, it is an allusion to JFK's expansion of the US space program. In other words, you might be familiar with it, the space race. So who can walk on the moon first? And this bit of competition kind of started there. So it shows his commitment to exploration, to making science exciting again, for creativity, wonder, exploration. So again, it's showing this kind of positive hope for the future. Then starts using some religious imagery. So he says, let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah. So it's a biblical reference. And essentially, this reference, you could say it appeals to his audience who are predominantly of Christian faith in the USA. So it's basically imploring them to reflect on themselves and their good virtues and values. But more specifically than the actual quote, undo the heavy burdens and to let the oppressed go free. So it's a direct quote from the Bible. and it's showing that humans should release their heavy burdens. In other words, heavy burdens just means their evil, selfish traits. So all negativity, they should release that and instead promote liberality and freedom, so being free. That's a priority, and that is how society will progress. They shouldn't be constrained by all this oppressive stuff. Instead, they should be free and let go of all the weight that evil and selfishness have caused them. Okay, now moving on, he then starts talking about there should not be a new balance of power, but a new world of law. So you've got syntactic parallelism. So he's acknowledging that a balance of power is unachievable. He knows that isn't exactly how things work. There can't be a balance of power because too much has happened and it's not the way the world works. Instead, it's the laws and rules which should be followed. There needs to be clearer rules, regulations across the world to promote peace and harmony. And then here, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserve. So you've got a triadic list. He's outlining very clearly here his intentions. So the strong, which are the rich, I guess, are justified in what they do. They need to, if they are strong, if they're rich, they need to have good intentions. And then they have to do right by the weak. So they have to help the poorer people. So the weak need to be secure. They need to be supported by these figures of power and money. And by doing that, that will promote peace. Okay, so coming to the close now. So he starts here. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor in the first 1,000 days, nor in the lifetime of this administration, or perhaps his lifetime on the planet. So you've got that nice syntactic parallelism in this final bit here. It's actually very honest, it's realistic. He is not saying that there's a quick fix and that overnight everyone's issues can be solved. That in his presidency role, he'll click a few buttons, he'll do a few speeches, and everything will be okay. It doesn't work like that. Instead, he's saying that this is a long term journey that everyone needs to go through together. And then to end with, but let us begin. So you've got your short imperative sentence there, and it's very final. Let us begin, but actually, it's offering that hope for the future, very realistic, and that the US and the world with him should go on this big journey for peace. So it's about beginning now. Okay, so quite a lot there. You might need to go through and add some extra notes. I would advise going through doing some further context research on the Soviet Union, the Cold War, etc. And even just some background on JFK as well, because there's quite a lot about him. But hopefully you've got the general gist of it. When it comes to a question, we'll be looking at, the voice he has when discussing his presidential role or what his intentions are for the future. So make sure you've got all your notes, and then, yeah, this one is done.